Hi everybody, and welcome to a ProBuilder tutorial on using the more advanced UV editing and unwrapping features within ProBuilder here in Unity. For this tutorial, I've upgraded the original basic UV scene with what might just be the world's worst, but most quickly made fancy magical archway. So this looks very impressive, and we'll show you how you can make something better. But the big idea will be you'll be able to unwrap this. Instead of using the auto UVs, you'll need to use some more advanced techniques to get this to fit the map just right. So we'll take a look at how you can do that. Just a quick recap, those auto UVs were the ones that allow you to have automatically tiling UVs. So as I move this geometry around any way at all, it pretty much takes care of itself on its own without any work from you. So this works well for a lot of things, but not for items where you need to be a bit more specific and detailed with how the UVs are being unwrapped. For example, something like this, where we want this color to wrap around up and underneath, and also have this front texture applied perfectly right on the front. Another major benefit of using the UVs or the unwrap UVs is that you can render out a UV template. For example, with this item, if I take a look in here, so I can see the UV lines that I've created for this, and we'll go over how this is created, of course. But the idea is I can render out just these lines and then pop into Photoshop and use those lines, or a GIMP or whatever you might be using for it. I can use those lines then to know exactly where to paint and create my texture. So for this tutorial, I will start from scratch on this arch and show you how to build up these UVs so you can have something similar, and then take it a bit further yourself, hopefully. So we're back at the simple gray box version of this arch. Nothing special. The very first thing I would tell you to do when working with manual UVs is to delete any faces that you don't actually need. They'll just kind of get in the way. This step isn't 100% necessary, but it'll make your life easier. For example, I know that all of these faces that are on the inside, I can just delete. They will never be seen. And especially when you are trying to make things a bit more performant, you want to get rid of any excess faces, and it will make your UV texture use up less space if you have to use all those faces, and just in general make your life a lot easier when working on these. So I've deleted those faces. Now I can start doing the actual UV editing. I'll begin by opening up the UV editor, and we can see we have a bit of a mess of UVs for this object. But again, a lot nicer now that we don't have these extra faces. There'd be about double the mess. Next, I'll actually apply the material to this object. So I can have the object selected here in object mode, and I'll drag and drop the archway material that I've created onto this. Now we have it, and as you can see, everything looks terrible. That's alright. We are still working through that part. Now we need to align these UVs so they are fitting onto that texture properly. If you're looking in the UV editor here, you'll notice that turning on and off this little toggle that looks like a brick wall just shows the texture or hides it. And it can be pretty useful to keep that on when you're lining up these textures just right. I think I'll start with the front face. So, switch to face mode, of course. So this front area I would like to match up so it covers over the front area on the here on the texture. So a couple different ways I could do this. I could start one at a time and start moving these faces around, but it's going to take quite a few clicks and lining them up and all that. Probably the easiest method, select just one of these faces and hit Alt-G or grow the selection, and then I can instantly convert these to manual and click on planar. And the planar unwrap in this case will work perfectly because this is actually all on one planar surface here, I guess you'd call it. So it kind of just quick takes that snapshot for the UVs and squishes them all down to one plane. So I have this here in the UV editor, and I can go ahead and start fitting it onto the texture. So in the UV editor, you can click with a left click to move things around, of course, using either the individual axes or both at once by clicking in the middle. If you hold Control, that pivot is going to snap to the grid. If you hold Shift, that pivot will snap to other UV points. So you can see how it's snapping to these vertices here. UV verts. And if you right click, you can actually move that pivot. And again, the same snapping keys will work. So I can hold Control, and now I'm snapping the pivot, or hold Shift and I'm snapping, or sorry, I mean Control will snap the pivot to the grid, and Shift will snap it to UV points. So when you combine those, hold Shift, right click, I snap it onto that point, release, and now my pivot is there. I can hold Shift, or actually Control and right click. Sorry, I meant Control and left click, I'm confusing myself now, and I can snap it from that point right around to a nice spot on the grid here. At this point, I could scale it down to match just right, but again, there's a shortcut. I can click on Fit UVs, and that just instantly fits it into the UV space. Let's move these other UV items out of the way so we can see the items we're editing more easily. So I can hit Control-Shift-I to select the inverse, and I'll move those, oops, misclicked, move those out of the way. So now at least here in the UV space, I can see what I'm doing a bit better. The next step will be unwrapping this interior area. So I could select these individually and align them together, take my time with that, or the much simpler way would be to select any one and start by first just getting this perfect. So I'm going to hold Shift, right click to snap its pivot, hold Control, drag it around, and fit it up to where it looks pretty good. I'll use Control to snap it to the grid again just a bit. Here I could try to shrink this and fit it down, but I actually want the entire distance from one side all the way to the other to fit right from the bottom to the top. That's what it looks like I've drawn in my texture here. So instead of trying to do that manually, I'm going to use the auto stitch tool. So with one face selected, hold Control and just click on adjacent faces, and you can see over here in the UV view, as I click, it's building them up and automatically stitching them together. So once I have that, these aren't in the right position, they aren't correctly set up, that's fine. I'll select them all and hit Fit. That fits them down to match into the UV space. And then I can pull it over until they match. So there we go, pretty straightforward and easy. I do still have the other side, but again, it's just select a face here. Convert to manual. Oops, actually first it's Alt-G so we can grow that selection out. Convert all those to manual at once. Drop that to or do a planar project. I keep making this more difficult than it needs to be. Just a quick fit and it's done actually. It's already in the right spot, that's great. Okay, so that's it. This might have been a little too simple of an example, but hopefully that helps. Let's take a look at some of the other features we didn't actually get a chance to look at here. I think number one would be, how did I actually build or draw up this texture that goes to the UVs? And the answer is using the render template tool. So if you click on the little camera icon up here, you'll get the render UVs option, and this will allow you to save out a UV template. So when I go into Photoshop, that is these green lines here, or that is the texture with the green line, so I can turn this on and off. Let's turn off a couple of these items underneath here so it's a little more obvious. Okay, so when you render out that template, you get basically a texture version of these UVs, which you can then use to know exactly where you need to paint items. So because I have this visible here, I knew to paint in this and to paint in this, and then I just dropped on these bricks very quickly and ugly, but it worked. And then from there, of course, turn off that and save it back out. Pop into Unity and apply it. So in a way, those are two different workflows. You can either already have this texture, maybe an artist made it for you, or you are using an existing one you got somewhere else, and you're matching the UVs to it, or first you build the UVs out, then you render out that template. You'll also notice we have a few extra features over here under the Actions panel for UVs, for the manual UVs. You can weld verts together just like you would in geometry. For example, if I take, let's say, one of these faces, I can split it, so now I can move it off as a separate face. If you're confused by the one underneath it, that's actually on the other side here. And just for this tutorial, I'm going to select all these and delete them. Ooh, I hit the delete key. I meant to hit the backspace key. Hooray for undo. Okay, so anyway, I have this face and I'm moving it around, right? It's a separate item, but I want to reattach it to the rest of these UVs without having to reproject and refit and all that. So I can take this pretty easily and match it up so it fits. Holding shift, it's snapping. Then I can drag select and get these verts here where I know it needs to weld, again just like in the geometry editing. You got to make sure those are welded up, and set the options here if I need to, if it's a larger or smaller distance. They should be exact on though, and just click weld. And now when I select one of these, they move together. You can also do a collapse function, again just like when you are using the geometry in ProBuilder, that instead of the weld will take any number of verts you have selected and collapse them all down to a single point. You can split them off as we showed, flip them around. The fit UVs is great. The select island tool is handy if you need to select sort of a grow selection. So with one of these selected on this chunk, we'll call it, or island, hit select and it picks it up for me right away. So just something to save you from a lot of extra clicks. You can also be in vertex mode and have a vertex selected and click on select face to select all the vertices on that face. And again, select island will also work. So there isn't a heck of a lot here, but it gets it done if you need to quickly create or even just modify some existing UVs. Again, if you have an asset you purchased on the asset store or got from an artist in some way and you maybe made a modification to it and you need to add something in, you can open it up using ProBuilder once you convert it to a ProBuilder object and modify those UVs pretty quickly and easily. So that's it for the quick overview of the advanced UV tools for ProBuilder. We have a lot more coming up on the way, so definitely keep an eye out for new tutorials. Texturing and UV editing in general is definitely an area that we know we need to improve quite a bit. The geometry tools have moved way ahead of them, but don't worry, that's coming up in the future. So thanks for watching and see everyone in future tutorials.